All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about navigation, and specifically, I'm going to talk about orbiting. So orbiting is this action when you roll the view around in front of you. So you can see I'm spinning the subfloor. I'm spinning the whole scene in front of me. Orbiting, we have a tool for it. So you can see it's the top tool on the left, and it has a shortcut key of O. So if I have any other tool selected and I press the O key, you'll note that it jumps up and selects the orbit key. So the O will jump you right into orbit. Now when I have this tool selected and I left click and drag, or I do one touch and drag if I'm using a touch device, we start orbiting around our scene. So we can left click and drag to orbit around our scene. Since orbiting is kind of a fundamental thing you need to do quite often, we have it set up so that if you had any other key selected or any other tool selected, like tape measure, you can still orbit by using the right mouse key, the right mouse button. So if you have a 3-button mouse, and if you have no matter what tool you have selected, you can always orbit by right-clicking and dragging around to orbit your view. If you're using a touch device, you can use a close 2 fingers. So if you do 2 fingers like this, and you press and you drag around, you'll also get into orbiting. Now let's kind of think about let's consider what we're orbiting around. If I were to start my orbit action, my press on a point, not on the background, but let's imagine, well, let's start my orbit left click, because I have the orbit tool selected, right here on this corner over here. What you'll notice is we orbit around that point. So you see, no matter, as I roll this around, we're keeping that point that I started my press on kind of centered. We're keeping that in its location, and we're orbiting around. So I can start over here, and I can orbit around this point. I can orbit around the back corner, and I can orbit around the front corner. This also works for touch. So if I were to do a one touch and start it on top of something, we would orbit around that point. If I start my orbit on the background, so I press out here, what we do is we orbit around the center of the world. And that's kind of hard to see. There's no visual representation of that, but it's dead center in the view. So it's kind of like right around here. You'll see we orbit around that. If I were to take and slide the stage off to the side there and start my orbit, then you'll notice if you imagine, I'm gonna just click and drag. You'll notice we kind of orbit around the center of the world. It's kind of an awkward orbit here. If I want to center something, I can double click on it and it will center it, and then we orbit around that point. Now let's finally talk about the axes of orbits, of what we orbit around. Up down will always tilt the stage or the subfloor along the global right axis. So if you think about a line coming out of the side of the world here, up-down drags will always rotate around that global axis, no matter how the subfloor is oriented. So if I roll it around this way, we still rotate around that global tilt axis where we can tilt our view of this thing with the up-down. Left-right is a little bit different. If you imagine a vector or an axis coming out straight, normal, or perpendicular to the subfloor itself, that is the axis around which we orbit when we do left-right. So if I go left-right, if I have it nice and like tilted this way, you can imagine it's rotating around almost the world up axis. But as I tilt the stage towards me, or the subfloor towards me, now if I go left-right, you'll notice it's still rolling around a center point. You see that? It's still rolling around that center point. So up-down movement will always rotate around the global right vector or right axis, and but left-right movement will always rotate around the normal axes of the stage. All right.